Welcome to Let's Unravel. I'm your friend Christina. Hey. So thank you so much for watching today's episode, and thank you so much if you guys tuned in last week. I do have a quick announcement. So if you happen to listen to last week's episode and you listened to it on Apple Podcasts, you might have noticed that there was a video component. Now, just so you're aware, for this episode and all the episodes moving forward, we are only going to be having audio formatted clips available on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. If you're still interested in having the video formatted episodes, you are more than welcome to head over to our YouTube channel. You can find us at Let's Unravel Pod. That's on YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. So thanks again for tuning in this week. And if you find that you like what you're hearing, please give us a like, comment, or review. I'd love to connect with you guys more, so you can connect with us on TikTok or Instagram, and it's at Let's Unravel Pod. And I'd love to hear any feedback that you might have, whether it's any ideas for future episodes, you name it. I'd love to connect more. So for this week's episode, I'm just going to jump right into it. It's going to be all about humble beginnings. And so the only way we can get to humble beginnings is we're going to talk about our win of the week first. We had a successful podcast launch. So the podcast went live on Thursday, June 26th. So when I woke up on Thursday, I looked at my phone, I instantly went to Apple Podcasts, and everything looked perfect. I mean, the video was up, the episode was there, the description, everything. Everything looked just as it should after I had uploaded everything. Then I instantly go over to Spotify, and the first thing I notice is episode 1 is not there. And there's two things that happen, or at least two things that happen to me when things like that go awry. Is one, I look at this and I go, oh shoot, this is a technical problem I don't know the answer to, so now I have to do all this research. And then the second thing I think is, okay, Christina, pull up your big girl pants and let's get this done. So I sit down at my computer and I try to figure out what is going on here. And all of a sudden I realize that you can't upload video clips to Spotify. And so because this was considered a video clip, it wouldn't sync. And so what I had to end up doing is and if you don't know anything about podcasting, just like I didn't know anything about podcasting, all podcast shows have what's called an RSS feed. And basically it's a one-stop place where all podcast shows will upload all of their episodes to one place, their RSS feed. And then the RSS feed will send the episodes to all the different platforms that people listen to on. So like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, you name it. Once, and since the clip that I put up there was a video clip, it didn't send it to Spotify correctly. So what I had to do is I had to upload an audio clip. And once I uploaded the audio clip, I can't prevent it from going to the other streamers as well. So if you go to Apple Podcasts and you noticed that there was 2 episode 1s, yes, that is exactly what ended up happening. So there's one clip with the video attached to it, and there's one clip that's just audio. And you might be thinking that was a mistake or whatever you might be thinking. And actually, I made the conscious decision to leave both those episodes up. And the reason why was I wanted to mark kind of like this humble beginning in this podcasting journey. And I wanted everyone to kind of be aware that it's sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm learning everything as I go, and I'm doing the best that I can. And I think that's also a great opportunity for other people to find validation in, that you're not going to be perfect at things when you try for the first time, and it's just part of the learning curve. So that is one of the announcements moving forward this week, is if you want to see the video component, you would have to go to YouTube. But as far as the win of the week goes, is I could have looked at this podcast launch one of two ways. I could have looked at it and said, well, it didn't launch successfully on Spotify, so it was a bad launch. Or I could have looked at it and been like, you know what? I said I was going to upload my first episode on June 26th, and I did it. It was successfully up on Apple Podcast and all these different things. And so basically what I decided to do for the win of the week, you looking at the glass half full, is we got the first episode out there. And sometimes it's just about starting. And that's what the beauty of Let's Unravel is. It's just about starting. It's just about getting out there. And even if things aren't perfect, when have you ever unraveled anything and it look perfect? It doesn't. It's life. And so moving from the win of the week to our topic today, humble beginnings. So humble beginnings, or sometimes I'll call it first attempts, is you'll notice in your 20s, you have lots of first attempts. And a lot of them have to do with adulting. So like adulting things like learning how to cook, maybe car repairs, maybe it's jury duty or taxes, or your first day at a new job, which if you hang around me for any amount of time, anytime I talk about somebody transitioning from like college into like a corporate job or to a full-time job, or someone going from retail to a full-time job, is I call it like your first like big girl or big boy job. So I don't know why, it just seems funny, but it's just one of those things when you're transitioning and you're going to your first day at your big girl or big boy job. Those are like your first attempts, and they're your humble beginnings. You don't forget those things. And so what's really cool is you'll notice over the span of this podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of different moments and a lot of different things that happen in your life. And a lot of times we talk a lot about firsts, because being in your 20s, it's your first decade of being an adult. One of the things that you'll experience is actually there's two things. You'll have character building moments, but you'll also have humble beginnings. And I need you to know those two things are very different from each other. And so character building moments, they challenge who you are as an individual, whereas humble beginnings, they show you what you're made of, and it's also usually on a public level. So that's where today we're going to talk about humble beginnings and how that's not necessary. It can test your character for sure, but there's also a difference, because a lot of times these character building moments, a lot of times will happen in more of a quiet time where it's just more about you, yourself, and I. Where when you look at humble beginnings, a lot of times people can see firsthand what's going on. And so with today's episode, I'm going to share with you 3 experiences that I've had of humble beginnings. And so the first one I wanted to jump into actually took place when I was around like 13 to 14 years old. And it's going to sound a little weird, but I'm just going to jump right into it. When I was about 13 to 14, I used to make and sell duct tape wallets. Yes, that sounds very bizarre, because if you're thinking about duct tape, you're thinking about duct tape that you wrap on pipes, or I don't know, anything you would use duct tape on. And I would take those rolls of duct tape and I would turn them into wallets. And I actually would sell them to friends and family. And so where the humble beginning in that actually starts is I remember the day my friend, she came walking into school and she had made these duct tape wallets. These things were the coolest thing I had ever seen. I mean, at the ripe age of 13, of course. So she comes walking in with these duct tape wallets. She actually had a couple made, so she actually just gave me one. I remember looking at it and being like so impressed. I was just so cool. She was making them. She had started to sell them to friends at school and just different things like that. And I remember I had brought it home, and one of my parents' family friends, they actually owned a gift shop in Connecticut, and that's where I'm from, born and raised. And so they had a gift shop in Connecticut. She saw this duct tape wallet. She opened it up. She was amazed at the craftsmanship, because my friend did an excellent job. And she was just like, these are so cool. I would love to buy 10 of these for you and from you and sell them in my shop. And of course, being 13 years old and wanting to pretend like I was on Shark Tank, even though I don't even know if Shark Tank was on when I was 13. But I just remember in that moment thinking, yes, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to promise her 10 wallets, and I'm going to talk to my friend, and we're going to work out this little deal where she makes some, and like we'll split the profits 50-50 because it's my connection. Like I had this whole plan in my head. Well, I walk into school Monday morning and I'm telling my friend like, hey, do you want to make some wallets? We can sell them at this gift shop, and told her like my plan. And she's like, no, I don't. And I was like, shoot, I just promised 10 wallets to my parents' friend, and like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So just like any like plausible 13-year-old who's delusional enough that they could just start a business with a product they don't even know how to make, I looked it up on YouTube. And so sure enough, I look up a video on YouTube, and by the end of it, I made my very first duct tape wallet. Now, for any of you that happen to be watching on YouTube, I'm going to show you this duct tape wallet. And for any of you that are just listening, I'm going to describe this wallet. And so if you notice this wallet right here, it is hideous. And you know what? I noticed that the camera doesn't even do it justice, but this wallet is so big and clunky, and it has 3 different colors. It has white, it has silver, and it has black. And it's not like, oh, these colors are nice and like it's a design choice. This was like a 13-year-old trying to make a wallet for the very first time, and it looks pathetic. That's what this looks like. And even to drive home, these little pockets where you'd put the credit cards are so clunky. I mean, you couldn't fit a credit card into these things. And then my favorite, my absolute favorite, is the ID holder. And like there's a little bit of plastic. That plastic is actually from a Ziploc baggie. I cut it out and I just taped it in there. Oh, and very last, it doesn't close. It's so thick and clunky, it doesn't close. And that was my very first duct tape wallet. And so now for those that have watched or you've heard me explain it in detail, and if you have this idea of what it looks like in your mind, by the time I finished making my very first wallet, and I also need to explain, I was making this wallet in my childhood like home in the kitchen, and the kitchen was part of like an open concept. So my parents were in the living room, and so they could see me, I could see them. I was sobbing by the time I finished making this duct tape wallet because I knew it was so bad. And so my parents, they come around me, and my mom's like, "What's the matter?" And I'm explaining to her, I have to have 10 wallets made for Sunday. I explained to her, I have to have 10 wallets made for Sunday, and the wallet I just made looks horrible and it doesn't close. And that was the biggest thing I kept telling her. I go, it's a wallet, it doesn't close. And then my dad being the optimist that he is, he looks at it and he goes, "Don't worry, Christina, it's just the first one." And it just is so funny and then my mom gives me the bright idea, why don't you talk to your friend and see if she can help you and different things like that. And sure enough, I go to school the next day and I talk to my friend and just different things like that. And she's gracious enough to show me the video that she learned how to make duct tape wallets on. And I actually have one here as well. And so once again, if you're watching on YouTube and you see this is the duct tape wallet, I actually kept it all these years later because I am sentimental. And I still remember, like I said, the first time I had seen it, it was the coolest thing. Even as like an adult and looking at it now, it's still just like the coolest thing ever. And this duct tape wallet, it's teal with some like black and white design on it for any of you listening. It's compact. It's great. It's very well created, great craftsmanship all the way around. So needless to say, so by the time I had learned to make duct tape wallets, they had looked like her duct tape wallets which was great. And then over time, I basically was about a year span, I kept making these duct tape wallets. I ended up selling them in that Connecticut gift shop. And basically, I was very successful with that little small endeavor, selling to family and friends and just different things. But from the time I first made that absolutely hideous duct tape wallet to by the time I finished my career in duct taping, and also on YouTube I have a final clip of the last wallet I actually made in my duct tape career. By the time I perfected it, it was slim, it was compact, and I remember people used to actually even comment on the duct tape wallets by the time I finished and were amazed. They were impressed. They were like, "How did you do that? That was so cool." And that was just something where, once again, your humble beginnings don't define where you end up. It just marks where you start. That's really the point of a humble beginning. And so with the close of that story, anytime I ever go to start new things, I'm always thinking about that first duct tape wallet in my head. Anytime I think about starting something new, anytime I think about something being a challenge, I just always think about that duct tape wallet. And I just think, all right, if 13-year-old Christina thought she could sell 10 wallets without even knowing how to make a duct tape wallet, and then also put the pressure of having a deadline of within a week, I think I can do a podcast and have it launched within a month, even though that also was a bit crazy. But the point is, once again, it's humble beginnings. You have to start somewhere, and sometimes you just have to start. So with the next story, I'm actually going to jump into. This took place a little more recent. I was 25 when this next story took place. So at 25, I had entered into a whole new career industry, and I actually entered the world of insurance, and not just the insurance like Allstate or statewide or anything like that. I actually got into insurance that was delivered to like Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. So this was considered like the big leagues in insurance. And I started in insurance as an assistant. And by the end of my career, I actually ended up being the global head of my department. We had offices in London, and they were slowly expanding to other countries as well. When I had first started, it was really rocky for me. And a lot of times people talk about imposter syndrome and just different things like that. And in a way, I guess you could say I had imposter syndrome. I mean, imposter syndrome, a lot of times you find yourself in these places that you're like, how did I get here? It's because of like an overhype or something like that. I mean, these people knew I knew absolutely nothing about insurance. So I was an imposter kind of to myself, so to say. Anyways, but the point is, when I started in insurance, I was an assistant. And so one story that sticks out in my mind is I had been with the company for about 2 to 4 weeks. And at this point in time, the company I was a part of was considered like a startup company, even though, so it was considered a startup, but everyone that was working within this company had also been in insurance for numerous years. So they had a corporate background. So in a lot of ways, we had a lot of these corporate practices, but we really functioned like a startup, which was also a lot of fun because when I had joined, I was like one of 6 people. And then over time, as we reached double digits and different things like that, it just was a really exciting experience to be a part of. So when I had started and within like the first 2 to 4 weeks, they put me on a call with this vendor. It's me and like 2 other teammates. So it was like 3 people altogether of us. And so we're on this call, the vendors are talking, and slowly the 2 other guys are like, we have to jump off this call to go to another call, which is also fairly normal for being in corporate, is you could be on calls and have to leave to go to another call. And so by the time the second guy goes, oh, I have to drop, now it's just me and these vendors, and I have no clue what is going on in insurance. And they're asking me questions and they're asking questions about business and just all these different things. And like, I find a very polite way of basically saying like, I have just started. I have no background in experience. I have no background in insurance. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. But needless to, and the other thing is I was going to say, when you have humble beginnings and you don't really know what you're doing, people are so incredibly gracious if you give them the opportunity to be gracious. And I mean, not always, but everything that I've experienced in my life, when I've been just honest with people and said, I don't really understand what's going on, people will a lot of times meet me where I'm at and they'll be very gracious and actually slow things down and they'll talk to me and just different things like that. So I encourage you, when you're doing new things and you're having humble beginnings, if you can show up in a way where you're honest and you're like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm happy to help where I can, but I really don't know what's expected. It's one of those things, people want to be gracious and people want to help. And so that was something I had realized. And like I said, from the time I had started in insurance to the time I ended, it was drastically different. And the area where I had started to really struggle with this like imposter syndrome, and like that was my first experience with imposter syndrome, was once I had become the head of my department. And so for such a long time, because of being an assistant and because of not knowing the industry and having to learn everything on my feet and being part of a startup, there were so many nuances to this job that by the time I had become the head of my department, it was almost like I was holding my breath. I felt like I was constantly holding my breath, that anytime somebody was going to ask me a question, was I really going to know the answer? But the surprising thing was, every time someone asked me a question, I did have the answer. I understood what was going on. The thing that I had realized with imposter syndrome is it really links to that phrase of fake it till you make it. And as someone who really lived by that phrase of fake it till you make it, I've realized, and this is a hot take, I hate that phrase. I want to throw it in the trash. And the reason why I want to throw it in the trash is because I've decided to rewrite it, to believe it, to be it. Because every time I would fake it to make it, I was an imposter because I didn't think I belonged because I was faking whatever this thing was. Whereas when I started to believe, like perfect example, when I went from being an assistant to being the head of the department, and I started to believe like, no, like I know what's going on. I see value in what I'm doing. I'm pushing the needle forward. And like I said, it was one of those things when you are already thinking in this imposter syndrome kind of place and you're thinking fake it till you make it and just all these different things, you do start to buy into this idea that you're an imposter, that you don't really know what's going on. And like I said, once you rename the phrase to believe it to be it, everything started to change for me, because once I started to realize I had a value in what I was doing. So I didn't need my coworkers to tell me I was doing a great job. I didn't need my coworkers to validate me on these different things, whether management saw it, whether anyone around saw it or not. The thing is, I knew what I was doing because I had changed in my mindset that I was going to believe it to be it. And so in my mind, I had decided to change it to believe it to be it. And that was one of those things where making that change, I was able to step out of imposter syndrome. And a lot of times we don't even realize we're in this place. Sometimes you don't even realize you're holding your breath, desperately praying someone is not going to ask you a question that you don't know the answer to. Ultimately, when you throw out fake it till you make it and you move in, believe it to be it, things change and you're able to see a lot more clearly and you're able to have a new level of confidence. And it's easy to stop and kind of wonder why this has anything to do with humble beginnings. And the reason why is because that was my first experience really with the whole imposter syndrome thing. And it also leads us to the quote of the week. And for this quote, it's from Regina Brett, and it goes, "A writer writes, if you want to be a writer, write." And I think that's the same thing for anyone in their life doing anything they want to do. If you want to be a podcaster, podcast. If you want to run a business, build a business. It's these different things where it's like a lot of times we stop ourselves from pursuing the things we want to pursue because we think you need the 5-star ratings, you need things to look very professional. And if there's anything that I want to really drive an emphasis to, it goes back to my Apple podcast and having duplicate first episodes. To a lot of people could feel like this doesn't look professional, this could whatever. And that's the beauty of humble beginnings. And so wrapping up with this whole experience in insurance and having that first imposter syndrome moment and being on the phone call with the vendors and not knowing what I'm really even hearing them talk about. And then even funnier story is I had been working within insurance and we specialized in cybersecurity. And within, I think 2 weeks, like 2 to 4 weeks, I got hacked. I was trying to set up my printer and I went to a website I shouldn't have gone to, or I clicked a link I wasn't supposed to, and I got hacked. And it was a very humbling experience. And it was one of those experiences where I'm talking to the IT team and they basically were being very kind about it and gracious. And it's like, things happen and you didn't know and so on and so forth. And I'm talking to my manager and he's being really gracious about it too. And then the head guy, the chief of IT, calls me and he's like, "Hey, can you send me screenshots of everything you did? And can you do like a full write-up of everything?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I send it over to him and he goes, "Great, we're going to make training material all about this so this doesn't happen again." And instantly I'm like, oh, hand to head, this is so embarrassing. But once again, it's a humble beginning because I can promise you I don't click links on anything ever anymore just because of that experience. And that's the beauty of humble beginnings. You have to start somewhere. And you know what? Humble beginnings, sometimes they're embarrassing. It's life. And so that was that was my second experience out of 3. My final experience that I was going to share with you guys today really has to do with podcasting. It's just this whole world. I stepped into this. I had no clue what I was doing and learning everything in real time. All of this is my first attempt at things, but I think there's something really beautiful about inviting people into your progress or process, should I say, and really how getting to see something start from the bottom up and not knowing where it's going to lead or not knowing where it's going to go, but also getting to see everything in its messy beautifulness too. And it's kind of funny because one of my favorite things to do when I watch TV shows is I love watching shows, especially like The Office, is if you watch the pilot episode, you see the camera work and you see everything. And even the actors, they look a particular way. But then if you go to the newer seasons, so I think there's like 10 seasons in The Office. If you go to season 7 to 10 and you go to the first episode of each of those seasons, the show looks drastically different in comparison to episode 1, season 7 versus season 1, episode 1. And the reason why is because humble beginnings. The way it first started looked one way, and then they got funding and they got popular and people grew their hair out and changed their style and all these different things. But the beauty of it is it's the exact same thing. Anytime you watch a long running show and you start to watch from the first episode of one season to the first episode of the next season, that's when you see the progress. That's when you see the changing of things. That's when you know a show had gotten successful because the cameras got better, actors grew out their hair, or they got better makeup artists, whatever it might be. But that was something where, once again, it's humble beginnings and getting to see it. And it's the same thing with this podcasting journey. And so to take a step away from my experiences and kind of getting to have a visual of what these experiences look like besides my own, is my favorite thing is seeing humble beginnings and actually seeing them portrayed on television. And so the funniest thing is, if you're anything like me, I grew up watching all kinds of shows from like the 90s to the early 2000s. And one of the shows that was like a childhood favorite of mine was Boy Meets World. And there's 2 episodes from season 7. This is season 7, episode 9 and 10. This is right after, and spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Boy Meets World, I'm gonna wreck it for you. Corey and Topanga, they get married and they come back from their honeymoon and they're looking for a place to live. And then by episode 10, you realize they're not happy with where they are setting up shop. They basically get a rundown, ratty old apartment because it's the only thing they can afford. And you start to notice with Corey, he doesn't want to live there. He is actually hoping his parents can bail him out and help him get the picture perfect apartment, whatever the case may be. And what happens is when he's sitting in that apartment, him and Topanga realize they have to have this humble beginning. And what happens is by the end of episode 10, and I encourage you to go watch it, is you notice he fixes a pipe within his drain so they can get clean water. And once he turns the faucet on, gets a cup of water, it fills up to the top, and he looks at it and he walks it over to Topanga. And it basically is one of those things where he said, like, I did that. And that's the cool thing about humble beginnings, is once you have accomplished something, it doesn't matter how big or how little it is. I mean, he fixed a pipe and he had a glass of water. A lot of people would say that's a small win. But for him, he had never done that before. It was his humble beginning that once he stopped and looked at the glass, he walked it all the way over to his parents' house and he goes, I did that. And that's something that you can't get anywhere else but from a humble beginning. And you even see that again with another great TV show I grew up watching, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was the same thing. There was an episode in particular with Uncle Phil and Aunt Vivian when they talk about how they grew up in like the projects. They had gotten married, they were living in the projects or wherever. And the whole theme of the show is about their success, about how he's a judge, how they live in Bel-Air, but they didn't start there, how they had humble beginnings. And that's the beautiful thing about life. And so wrapping up this episode and giving you guys some key takeaways is that everyone has humble beginnings. Everyone. The second thing is they provide you with context for gratitude, and it also provides you context for what success looks like for you as well. Third, embrace the humble beginnings because they're marking points for your beginnings. They're marking points for your life, marking points for career, whatever the case may be. And lastly, you can't compare your humble beginnings to someone else's humble beginnings. Everybody's beginnings look differently, and that's okay. So thank you again so much for listening to Let's Unravel, and I'm so glad we got to unravel humble beginnings. And like I said in the top of the episode, I'd love to connect with you. So please connect with me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to know if there's any topics you want to go over, you name it. And if you can like, comment, and follow, a 5-star rating is greatly appreciated. It really moves the needle forward with the show. And like always, I look forward to seeing you soon. I'll see you again next week. Talk soon. Bye.